Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Phylum Annelida lecture. Today we're going to be learning more about the specific adaptations of annelids. These adaptations will also be more explored throughout the polychaete, oligochaete, and hirudinea laboratory investigations. The key new adaptations for annelids is the presence of metamerism, or better known as segmentation. All annelids are organized into ring-like segments and can be observed as striations externally. Upon dissection, you can also observe internal segmentation, which in the case of annelids will be observed through divisions called septa. Also noted in the previous video, segmentation evolved at least 3 times in the animal kingdom. In the image on this slide, we can see how segmentation is broken down into the rings of an earthworm, the body segments of the crayfish's abdomen, and the segmental organization of the fish's muscles. Segmentation has a lot of benefits, and it is strikingly obvious in the annelids. The image here shows the breakdown of an annelid segment. Within each segment, separated by an internal wall called the septum, you can see the presence of the nephridium, the nervous system, and blood vessels to deliver essential nutrients and facilitate gas exchange. What's more, the presence of segmentation also facilitates flexible support through the presence of the hydrostatic skeleton, and also a pretty efficient strategy for movement, but more about that later. The body cavity of the annelid is used as a textbook example for the coelomate body plan. The body cavity arises by segmental splitting within a solid mass of mesoderm. So what we are seeing in this first image, marked A, is that solid mass of mesoderm in red. The coelom, or body cavity, begins to form within that mesoderm in image B. So here we can see we have the solid mesoderm, and later in development we have the forming coelom here in image B. By the time that we get to image C, we can see that the body cavity has enlarged and formed the septum. Each segment is characterized by the presence of an anterior and posterior septum, which will be readily observable when you conduct the earthworm dissection. Additionally, a dorsal and ventral mesentery surrounds the digestive tract, completing the coelomate body plan. So if we remember here, we were at image B, we have the forming coelom, and by the time we get to point C in development, we have a much larger space. That space is divided by 2 septa, one anterior, one posterior, and we can also see here we have that coelomate mesentery that's being surrounding of our blood vessels and our digestive system right here. So all the other stuff is going to be within the coelom. We have a lot of coelomic fluid, and we're going to talk more about that and its relationship with the hydrostatic skeleton coming up. From the development of the body cavity, 2 muscle groups will also develop. The circular muscles, which contract the width of the worm, and the longitudinal muscles, which contract the length of the worm. Using a combination of muscle contractions between these sets of muscles and rhythmic coordination produces the stylized movement called peristatic movement. The next time you see an earthworm after a rainstorm crawling around, give a second thought to their advanced movement capabilities and give them a hand back to the soil as long as it's safe to do so. Just make sure you wash your hands afterwards. The other advantage aside from the movement is the hydrostatic skeleton. Each segment of the earthworm contains its own nerves, muscles, and excretory structures. This means that each segment can more or less be controlled independently of one another. Using these adaptations, earthworms are not only capable of movement, but also capable of applying pressure on the coelomic fluid in their bodies to create a support structure called a hydrostatic skeleton. We have seen the general hydrostatic skeleton in a variety of different phyla with subtle nuances, but the general effect is consistent among phyla. Another advantage to segmentation is that it potentially reduces the impact of injury on the whole organism. If an individual segment is damaged, the surrounding segments can still operate as long as the damage is not egregious. This helps to increase the chance of an organism surviving trauma, and some species of annelid are even able to regenerate damaged parts as long as it is not too severe. Pictured here is the squid worm, a fascinating polychaete worm. You can see that each segment here is moving in a rhythmic pattern that enables the school creature to navigate in its surroundings. You can also see that this worm has a remarkably specialized head. We refer to these specialized sections as tagmata. Tagmatization is the process of combining multiple metameric segments to form body regions. The external effect of tagmatization is really observable in arthropods, which is our next unit, and in the case of this fly, can be viewed as a head, thorax, and abdomen. These segments facilitate adaptations for feeding, movement, and reproduction, respectively. Before we depart, let's take a final look at some annelid-specific adaptations. You may wish to use these notes as a way to compare and contrast the different worms that we have learned about in phyla Platyhelminthes, Nematoda, and Annelida as well. Externally, annelids have a lot going on. In this picture on the slide, you can see the presence of parapodia, which are fleshy projections on the lateral surface of the worms. From these parapodia, thin chitinous bristles called setae extend. Now, I sometimes refer to them as setae. Setae is just another way to pronounce it. Again, setae have a variety of functions, including the anchoring of the animal to a substrate. Lastly, the annelids are covered in a non-living secretion from epidermal cells called the cuticle. We have seen the cuticle in other worms, and it offers similar functions in the annelids. Our next structure is the clitellum. Members of Clitellida all have this band-aid-looking structure during some point of their life cycle. The clitellum is a series of segments that are swollen and facilitate reproduction in earthworms. Annelids have a closed circulatory system. Their blood is contained within blood vessels at all times unless injured. Their version of the heart, sometimes called the aortic arches, facilitate the movement of blood all over the worm. You can see in the image towards the bottom of this slide that small blood vessels aid in the distribution of nutrient and oxygen to tissue within each segment. These small clusters of blood vessels are located right in these areas. So each one of these clusters would be contained in a segment, delivering nutrients and gas exchange throughout the worm. These cluster of 5 structures right here, these are the aortic arches. And you'll see this in the dissection later on in the unit. You'll see how these are going to be pumping blood and moving out through the ventral blood vessel down here, which runs the entire length of the worm, and then the dorsal blood vessel, which runs on the top of the worm as well. Earthworm respiration is nothing new. Many species rely on diffusion through their skin, which only works if the skin is moist. Terrestrial annelids take a great deal of care to avoid desiccation and prefer to avoid light and heat. Polychaete worms may also possess gill-like structures. Annelids contain a complete digestive tract. The earthworm dissection will have you investigate the digestive system of these worms, taking a look at the specialized structures such as the crop and gizzard. Excretory structures are organized as nephridia, which are tubules that collect and release waste and water through pores on the ventral surface of the worm. Lastly, we have reproduction. The different classes of annelids handle reproduction very differently. Polychaetes are known to be either dioecious or monoecious and have fairly elaborate methods for asexual reproduction. Class Clitellida are monoecious, but they are unable to self-fertilize themselves. When conditions are right, they have also been observed being able to reproduce asexually as well. And that's it. I hope that this video has helped to clarify any components of the annelids. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.